us in discussion as we shift from learning about family to learning more broadly about citizen diplomacy. This session plus the next 2 Sundays are on very different topics, but they should be of interest. To everybody because they have to do with our everyday lives and have implications for us if we want to have essentially power and to in our world, and to be able to understand ourselves and our world. So today I'm going to focus on particularly on international relations, on our modern condition, and on power. Most of the time, we're going to be talking about power, and hopefully this will be of interest to you because I think, and I hope that you want to have, in some sense, more power in the world, although you may have a somewhat negative conception of power. So we'll talk more about this. So let me share my screen, and I'm glad that some of you are already kind of introducing yourselves. Please go ahead and do that in the chat, and then by all means ask questions in the chat, write comments. Please use the chat because we actually value your comments in the chat. So actually, before I jump into anything, I'm wondering if Summer, April, and Dia, if you guys can just let us know if there's anybody in this meeting that you need information from. Summer, especially because you're gathering like Facebook profiles and other things from people.
Yeah, I'm actually good. The only thing is I'm missing a few birth years, but that's only from the people who have not been showing up to the sessions.
Gotcha. Okay. And then April or Dia, do you guys, are there any of the people here that you are in charge of getting family profiles from?
No, all of mine who I need it from aren't on the call right now.
Okay. All right. And April?
And also same, but I'm gonna double check, and if I do need anything, I'll just reach out. I'll private message the people that I need.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. Let me, before I forget, we should take a photo of everybody. And so if you can turn on Chirunim and Etuoma, if you could turn on your video for a moment. Zineng, I think Zineng is still having issues connecting with us. But Abdul, likewise, if you can turn on your yes, perfect. And Etuoma, I don't know, Chirunim, if Etuoma is your brother is paying attention, but if you can get him to turn on his camera, that would if you happen to be with him. All right, on 3. Okay. If you could smile, 1, 2, 3, smile. Fantastic. Let me take another photo just in case we had some people with eyes closed. On 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Okay, let's jump into things. I'm going to share my screen. And start us off here. Okay, so everybody, I'm assuming, can see the screen. And let me now share fully. All right, so let me put this here. And I'm trying to, okay, that's probably the best way of doing this. So there are 2 parts to the discussion today. One is on our modern condition in international relations. And then, as I mentioned, most of what we're going to be talking about is about power. So I want to start off by asking you guys, what is one thing you would most like to change in your country or the world, and why? We're not going to be able to get to all of you, but I would love to hear from a few of you. And if you want to volunteer your answer in the Zoom chat, please do so. But this is a pretty important question. Begum, joining us from Turkey.
One thing I want to change about my country, right? The question is.
Or the world.
And the world. The thing that I want to change in my country is freedom and rule of law. So I want more freedom, basic liberties, civil liberties in Turkey, like free speech, freedom of conscience, press freedom are the ones that come to my mind first. And the second thing that I want my country, more improved rule of law, so equality before the law. So no, regardless of the status and the race, the ethnic identity of the citizens, I want all the citizens to be equal before the law. So this is what we call rule of law in political science discipline. In terms of the world, I would want a more fair world. So the uneven nature of development, some parts of the world are starving to death, while some other parts live in luxurious state. So this unequal, level of development, this the lack of balance in terms of incomes, and this really makes me feel bad. So I would want a more equal and fair world in the general sense.
Okay, great. Thanks, Begum. Chia, joining us again from United Arab Emirates, but from Cameroon.
Yes, I'm Chia Terence. I'm joining you from United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, from Cameroon. Yeah, if there is one thing I would like to change in my world and my country as a whole, is power, politics. People sometimes they are using politics and silencing people with no nothing, like no one will hear about when they're using politics to silence people, and no one is hearing about it, and everything is going like silently like that. Like in my country right now, because of this power, a lot of people are homeless, a lot of people are dying, a lot of people need help because of the politics and the power. I would consider politics and power because these are small things that they can sort them out, and also, and because the people are ignorant sometimes and they go about doing things that they don't know. So, for example, if I could change something in my country right now, it should be power, politics, and also in the world, power and politics is taking over everything. Because now we are seeing the influence everywhere, and if that is the only thing I see, that if it is making, if things make right, the world will become a better place for everyone to live in. Power.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I want to just share, two of you have answered this question via the Zoom chat. Umar from Pakistan said, I would love to change the mindset of gender biasness in Pakistan. And Abdul said, corruption is one thing I would like to change in my country and the world at large. Almost every person, Abdul is from Ghana, almost every person, especially our leaders, are corrupt to the extent that they fail to serve the citizens and rather enrich themselves. Chunanim from Nigeria is saying, I would like to change the perception of rule of law in Nigeria. So echoing what Begum said, in definition, everyone is supposed to be equal before the law, but in reality, some powerful people are more equal than others before the law. So important points that you guys made. Let me point out why in part I'm asking you this question. And this gets at our modern condition. So I've talked about this before, and some of you for this may be familiar, but this is kind of a fundamental condition of our modern lives, especially in a globalizing world. Which is that we are intertwined yet disconnected. And what that means is that we depend on strangers across the world for especially the products that we consume, but in other ways, not necessarily so good. So the sharing of or the transmission of disease and other things across borders is something that affects us all. There are lots of things that are good that happen across borders, and there are lots of things that are bad that happen across borders. So we are interconnected in various ways. And yet we're not always clear about how that's happening. And we don't know how to get along and cooperate oftentimes for mutual benefit. There is a lot of cooperation going on, but there's a lot of ways in which we're not cooperating effectively. So you guys might remember during the COVID pandemic, it was hard to get nations to cooperate. The rich nations were buying up lots of the supplies of vaccines at the expense of poorer countries. The United States included, by the way, was like hoarding, taking lots of because we could afford it. And so other places didn't have as many vaccines and suffered accordingly. So that's a breakdown in collaboration, in cooperation. And in some sense, because we don't have international law, we don't have equality across, as you guys put it, Begum and Chirunim, equality under the law in international terms. It's basically, your life depends in part on what country you live in. And so that is a fundamental problem. So the next question is about kind of examples that you guys have of how we are intertwined yet disconnected. I just gave an example with COVID, but I'm wondering about other things that you think we should be, that kind of help define that we're intertwined yet disconnected from each other.
Okay, can I go?
Chirunim from Nigeria. Yeah.
Okay, we are intertwined yet disconnected because across the world we have a lot of us who share the same values, who share some similarities, like food, family, culture, educational patterns. We are intertwined in the sense that we are much closer, and yet we are disconnected because of our geographical location and independent orientations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I would say, to the first thing, which is, we share certain things in common. Those are things we have in common. They don't necessarily intertwine us with each other. Let me give you a hint, and I suspect you guys can come up with examples pretty quickly. What I'm thinking about, which is in our economy. Can you think of specific ways in which we are intertwined yet disconnected in our economy? Zineng, who's from China but joining us from Canada, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I suppose if we really want to talk about the perspective of the economy, we suffer from the economic downturn simultaneously because of the COVID-19, and also we are suffering from the rise of conservatism, conservatism, and also because of COVID-19, the communication among countries are decreasing as well. So maybe I suppose we are intertwined because we are facing and encountering the same challenge like COVID-19, like the economic downturn, and also including the marketing depression. But we are disconnected because we fail to communicate with others to understand each other during the pandemic. So yeah, this is my understanding.
Good, great. And those are, so obviously the COVID pandemic indicates we are all intertwined. It affected the whole world. And economic downturns, when they happen, they oftentimes happen in a lot of countries. Although they vary from one country to another, the downturns tend to affect many countries. And yet, we
Yes.
fail. Yeah, go ahead, Zane.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. And also, like I think about us, maybe we are also intertwined because even currently the Ukraine and Russia war is still ongoing. And even though this war is between two countries, but this war heavily influences on us, like all over the world. Because of this war, our lives, our daily lives, and our international relationships are becoming more and more intensive and strained than in the past. So maybe it can also be a very good example of that's how we are all intertwined but yet disconnected.
Yep. Great example. War is another great example in ways in which we're intertwined. In the case of the war in Ukraine, it's a couple of things, right? One is food, because Ukraine is such a source of grain, and if Russia knows this well and is attacking currently their grain supplies and distribution. And the other is oil and gas, right? Because Russia is such an enormous source of the world's oil and gas. There have been kind of implications not just for Europe, for other countries across the world as to where they're getting these essential fuels. Mohammed, you had a point you were going to make, and I'm wondering if we can't take everybody right now, and I'd love to go to Mohammed because he hasn't spoken yet, and Mohammed's joining us from Cyprus, but comes from Afghanistan. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Regarding this question, actually, just I'm thinking of other points. Actually, just you have made the points like COVID-19 and also the war, which is ongoing right now, and also the other things. There are like religions and also the borders that we have actually. I mean, so. In our country that just we limited that area that it belongs to this place and that belongs to the other place. I mean, these all things, what I think, I mean, limits and disconnected the people and worldwide actually changed. The important thing is religion, and also the discrimination, these things, skin, color, I think these all things affect negatively the connection. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So religion, and then also kind of notions about race and culture and so on are in some senses. I mean, religion is transnational, right? And so it is in some sense intertwining us across countries. And yet we're disconnected because we practice different religions and we have different concepts of kind of the value of different races and different colors and so on. So I think you guys are bringing up great points. There are a variety of you also sharing, and I just want to share some of your points via the Zoom chat. So Nayab, who I believe is joining us likewise from Pakistan, says, going back to the previous question, she'd like to change literacy and awareness in her country, because in her opinion, if people know about their rights, then they can speak out on everything. Actually, April, can you read the Zoom chat comments so that it's not just me speaking? I'm at Etuoma Agioto, who's commenting from Nigeria, and he starts with, "I would love to change or reduce."
Yes, I would love to change or reduce the level of tribalism, tribal bias, and religious fanaticism, and its significance. Thank you, fanaticism and its significance in Nigerian.
Yeah, in Nigeria.
And
So getting back, so that
going
connects to
down.
what, yeah, you're going to continue in a sec, but I'm just giving a little context here. So that gets back to what Mohammed just said, joining us from Cyprus, about religion and the ways in which religion can be a source of kind of unity among those who share the same religion, but division among those who don't share the same religion. Nusrat from Bangladesh, what does she say, April?
I would love to change the rules of environmental laws. Our country developing fast, but does not follow environmental laws.
Yep, a different situation. Of course, the environmental policies is another way in which we're intertwined yet disconnected, right? Our environmental policies in the United States and the world affect everybody. One thing the United States criticizes China for being such a big polluter. Well, it's actually per capita, the United States, Americans are the biggest polluters in the world. Yes, the Chinese have surpassed the United States in total production of carbon in the world, but the United States is still the biggest consumer, and we affect the wider world in so many different ways by creating much more pollution in other parts of the world, with among other things disastrous consequences in Pakistan, which has been experiencing really adverse effects like major flooding, as I'm sure you guys are aware, in Pakistan. Fatima, who's joining us, I think also from Pakistan, what does she say, April?
Sorry I joined late as I was traveling. One thing I really want to change in Pakistan is gender discrimination. Specifically, women are not allowed mostly to talk about their rights. Working in education sector for years, I witnessed that most women are deprived of basic needs.
And Umar from Pakistan?
Pakistan and India are intertwined, having the same language, same skin tone, but still disconnected due to border issues and political instability.
Yeah. Yeah, great, and thanks, April. Great points that you guys are bringing up. This is, by the way, one of the advantages of having this discussion on an international basis is you guys are coming at this from very different perspectives, right? In different parts of the world, and we're having therefore a much richer discussion because we get to hear your perspectives from different parts of the world. So I want to move on and kind of finish up our discussion of kind of the modern world. These are some of the ways in which we're intertwined, right? And I'm sure you guys are aware of all these things, but it's worth kind of keeping these in mind. One is that more people are moving across borders, whether as immigrants or refugees, and that means that we're mixing more. There are more people born to parents from different countries. The USA, of course, is powerful, but many other nations are rising powers. Brazil, Russia, India, and China are especially among the rising powers. More goods and services we use are made abroad. So food, cars, computers, phone service, movies, music, social media, etc., and so forth. You know, the rise of South Korea as a big culture center, with K-pop being extraordinarily popular across the world. It used to be that, you know, the British and the Americans dominated music and rock and roll, especially. Not anymore. Pop music is coming from all kinds of places. In African countries, it's increasingly, African music is increasingly popular. South Korean music. The computers that we buy, the cell phones, the cars that we buy, their components are made in different countries. In some cases, I will buy a pack of nuts, look at the ingredients, and find out the nuts in that one container come from like 20 or 30 different countries. Same thing with juice. Sometimes it's a mixed fruits juice. The juices from that juice in that one bottle come from different countries. So that's very much a way in which we're intertwined. And then lastly, many of the challenges we face are international. So climate change, and that's something affecting all of us in different ways and more severely in some places, including Pakistan and Bangladesh. Diseases like COVID, terrorism, piracy, And by the way, piracy is happening not just like cyber piracy online. There's real piracy around Somalia, and in that area of the world. There's active piracy on the seas. Slavery, war, immigration, refugees, cybercrime, as I mentioned, and tax evasion. So all kinds of ways in which we're intertwined. So I want to kind of introduce a little bit about international relations theory here. And some of this may be familiar to a number of you, so I apologize if it's kind of something you've already know, but it's worth kind of reminding us of this. And the way I'm framing this is by how relations between countries and peoples are determined. What is it that determines the relations between countries and people? And so there are three kind of schools, you might say, or theories in this. One is realism, which argues that power and interests, and especially military and economic powers and interests, are what drive the world, right? What determine relations between countries and people. Two is idealism, which says it's not so much necessarily about power and interests, it's more about ideas and values. Those are really what drive relations between peoples and countries. And then a third approach is sometimes called constructivism, and that is that individuals, but particularly elites in government, businesses, and nonprofit organizations, are what determine relations between countries in the world. Now, this has implications for citizen diplomats, right? And we're part of this training is trying to give you guys a sense of the ways in which these different concepts and relations impact your life as potential citizen diplomats, right? As people we want to cultivate as having influence in the world. One, in realism, it's that we need to pay attention to people's interests, and we need to pay attention to how power is distributed to make social change. So if we want to make social change, we have to pay attention to power and interests. Two is that citizen diplomats need to pay attention to the ideas and the values that people have, because those things affect people, right? And sometimes those values are conflicting values. We previously talked about, I think in my conversations with people from Asia, and especially from China, the word harmony comes up very often. And harmony is not a word that's used very often in the United States, because we're more individualistic than we are collectivistic. So Chinese put more emphasis on getting along with each other and establishing harmony between people, whereas Americans emphasize much more freedom of expression and being able to say what's on your mind and so on. And those are conflicting values. They don't have to be entirely conflicting as in fighting, but they are nonetheless somewhat conflicting values. And so different people have different ideas and values, and we as citizen diplomats need to pay attention to the values and ideas that people care about, because that's how we're going to be able to have an influence on the world. And lastly, we have to pay attention to elites, right? It doesn't mean we have to just pay attention to elites, because we need to pay attention to the needs of people whose needs are not being met, right? Ultimately, as citizen diplomats, we are concerned about all people, not just elites, but elites kind of have a lot of influence in the world. And so knowing where they are, knowing what their interests are, their power is, their ideas, their values, et cetera, and so forth, is important to us and our ability to impact the world. So that's it for the kind of things to think about with regards to our modern condition and to kind of international relations. We don't deal a lot with these things. There's a lot to kind of discuss about this. And I know that Begum, I know you have your hand raised and you want to jump in here. Happy to have you jump in a moment, but we don't cover this in great depth, in part because that's not the point here. The point here is not to provide you with with a lot of detail about a lot of things. It's instead to give you a lot of different concepts and ideas across different things. And we're going to be, over the next several years, we're going to be introducing more and more things, because citizen diplomats should be learning about all kinds of things. Begum, go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, I would not go into details. I just want to add some brief comments about these three theories that you have covered. So, realism state is the most important unit in realism. So, I think citizen diplomats should also be well aware of the fact that for the realist school of thought, states are the one and only actors in international relations. So, citizen diplomats should never forget that their steps must be taken into consideration by the states, first of all. So NGOs or international organizations like United Nations or even other big corporations, companies, all play a role in international politics. But if citizen diplomats wants to be successful, if they want their voice to get heard, they should make the states realize themselves first. So what realism tells is this primarily, I think. But yes, I agree with you in terms of idealism. The institutions like UN, European Union, and ideas, values, and cooperation is important. But I think social constructivism also tells the constructivist approach. So here there is an important scholar, Alexander Vance, who contributed to literature with his works. Alexander Vance says that anarchy is what states make of it. So according to the constructivist school of thought, states, citizen diplomats, individuals, or other actors in international politics, discourses, images, like arts, culture, like soft power is also important, because we construct the reality and perceptions. So I think these differences play a key role in making the citizen diplomats more successful while trying to get in initiative and take steps. That's all I can say.
Excellent, beautiful. Thank you very much for kind of adding those important details. So, as Begum was pointing out, under realism, states or governments, national governments matter more, and NGOs and religious movements and other powers are less important. But that's a view, right? And there are others who are arguing, in fact, in part via constructivism, that actually the world is now much more complex. It's not just a bunch of governments when it comes to international relations. There are other actors that are playing parts, obviously transnational corporations, but also NGOs, and even single actors. You guys, I'm sure, are aware, in Sweden, there are some people, and this happened in the United States as well, that can have, just as an individual, because of social media and the internet, I don't like, they think, okay, I don't like the Quran, and I think that Islam is a threat, and so I'm going to burn the Quran. And suddenly they start this, international conflagration with lots of people burning the, Swedish flag or the American flag, because they're pissed off, they're angry, understandably, because somebody's burning their sacred text. And so even individuals can have international power through social media and the internet. And oftentimes that's for bad. It's not for good. What we're trying to do is for good, we hope. And so excellent points, Begum. Really appreciate. And I need to talk with you after this, because I think we need to get you involved in some of the teaching here. Here this is part 2, and it's on an introduction to power. And I want to tell you a little bit about power. So I'm going to go into some detail about this, because I think it's rather important to helping you kind of think about where you have power and where other people have power. Just to start off with, if you can give me some sense of what you think, why should everybody understand power, and what do you think power is?
Okay, can I go?
Yes, Chirunim from Nigeria.
Okay, I think power is the ability to influence the behavior and actions of others. Yeah, and I think power is important because it exerts control and makes you achieve maybe targets. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Chirunim. And by the way, Chirunim raised another important point here in the about the ways in which we're intertwined in the world. April, do you want to read Chirunim's last point about sports?
We are also intertwined by sports like football and basketball. Sports helps to bring nations together through international competitions like the FIFA World Cup, etc. Yes, yet disconnected in a way that each country is expected to present their own teams, play patterns, and they belong to different regulating organizations.
Yeah, good points, Chirunim. Naib, we haven't heard from as yet. Naib, who I believe is joining us from Pakistan. Go ahead.
Sir, as you have asked what is power, I would like to elaborate simply. The ability to influence anything is power. And in international system, power is the most crucial element in the international system. Powers like major powers and in our ancient history, Persian Empire and Greek city-state and different biggest empires always fight for power. Still, the big powers of this time are struggling for power in the form of economy, political hegemony. So power is like about ability to influence anything lower than.
Okay, great. Naib, thanks for your points. Chia from Cameroon. Go ahead.
Thank you. Power is what I was telling you the first time when I spoke. This is the problem we are having. Power is finding yourself in a position where you can change things around. That is that is power, and that is the major problem we are having now, because immediately you find yourself at that position, you become something different, not what we expected. And this is the problem the world and the countries are going through, especially in Africa.
That you're saying that power tends to corrupt, if I'm
Yes,
understanding you correctly.
right. Yes.
I'm gonna, before we jump into other things here, actually, let's take one more comment, and I actually want to take another photo because there are a few more people that joined. Fatima, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I think power is the ability or the capacity to influence others. But what I think that power is not limited to someone or some country. Like nowadays, it's a time of social media. So I think that everyone has a power. The one has to recognize its power. Like even I always talk about the women of Pakistan. They are unaware. They are very helpless. But even then, they are powerful if they recognize their power. So I think it's the ability and the capacity to influence others. And through social media, like everyone is powerful. Thank you.
Fantastic. Farzana, and then we're gonna move on, take a photo of everybody and move on. Go ahead, Farzana, from likewise joining us from Pakistan, I believe.
Thank you. I think so. Your definition of the power, and I feel that the power is inflation of the action of another person, and use of power can be in shape of it come under the financial level. It is maybe used by the on the base of the race, gender. I can say nationality. So internationally, because it says my another colleague share, but power is have with all of the people have the power, and on every stage people are using their power on according to their ability. Like male have the power on their family, about their family. They are have the authority. They have authority to control the decision, to control the system. Like on the government level and international level, countries have the power to each other, because like a powerful country maybe can take the sanctions poor countries. Like so the power is authority of the influence, authority of the influence to control the action of the another person. I think feel that the power is this.
Okay. And Farzana, you're bringing up like three words that
Thank you.
are related, and I'm glad you're bringing them up, which is influence, authority, and power. In the following discussion, we're actually going to distinguish those things a little bit. So it'll hopefully kind of give you a more fine-tuned concept of power. But I want to stop for a moment and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And because we're at a larger number of people here joining, let me just take a photo again, and have Dia, if you could take photos likewise. And I'm assuming, Dia, you're taking photos throughout. By all means, take lots. And closer to 10 photos, send me to closer to 10 screenshots with the presentation stuff. I'd much appreciate it. Okay. All right. On 3, if you can have your cameras on, Zineng, Nayib, Etuoma, and I think that's it. And Sammy and Nusrat, if you could turn your cameras on briefly while we take photos of everybody. On 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. And then one more on 3. 1, 2, 3, smile. Fantastic, guys. Thank you. Okay, let me jump back in. I'm going to introduce you to some concepts. Okay, so this question, why should we all understand power? Power is how people maintain or change the status quo. In other words, change things as they are, or maintain them. Power is also directly and constantly impacting our lives, and we'll get into some examples of that. And power has long been unequally distributed, at least since human beings have settled into agrarian societies. When we settled into agrarian societies, then fewer people had to be, increasingly fewer and fewer people had to be involved in growing food, and you could have other people doing other things, becoming priests, becoming weapons makers and leather makers, et cetera, and so forth. And an increasing division of labor has meant increasing inequality in the world. And unfortunately, what that has meant is, with this kind of increasing inequality has come increasing abuse of power against majorities of people and control of large numbers of people. So a little just I think it was Farzana who mentioned this kind of authority, power, and influence. You can distinguish between influence and power. Influence, you might say, is a larger concept, which is when you try to affect A is one person or one group, tries to affect B, another person or another group, intentionally or unintentionally. Power is intentional. So there's influence, which is unintentional or intentional, but power is intentional. It is a type of influence. So intentionality matters. Some common assumptions about power. 1 is that power is bad. 2 is that bad people exercise power. Good people don't exercise power. 3, and this gets, by the way, to some things that Fatima was mentioning, because I think she's on the right track with where we're going. 3 is that power is something someone else exercises, not me. I don't have any power because I'm an ordinary person. I don't have power to influence things. And 4 is that power is not normal. Power is a disruption from our everyday life. It is not a part of our ordinary lives. Here's a more accurate picture of power. 1 is that all people exercise power in different ways. And I'm going to get to some ways in which we all exercise power, no matter how weak you may consider yourself to be. 2 is that power can be good or bad. Whether it is good or bad depends in part on the eye of the beholder. 3 is that both good and bad people exercise power. And what complicates things is that good and bad people can exercise power in good and bad ways. So an example is you can have a generally good parent who sometimes gets angry at their child, and or they have a bad day at work, or for whatever reason the child is really difficult, and they yell or they hit their child, right? So that, you might argue, is some people would argue that's perfectly appropriate for a parent to do. Others would argue that's an abuse of power. Whatever it is, the point is, those are very what we might consider a generally good person, a good parent, who's acting in a bad way and in a particular situation, according to some. The opposite is also the case. You can have a brutal dictator, right? Adolf Hitler, he kissed babies, and he did, in some senses, some good things. He helped the German economy grow. They employed a lot more people. They probably built schools and hospitals and so on. Dictators can do lots of good things, but they also, in the context of doing lots of bad things, right? So we're all capable of doing good and bad things, and exercising power in good and bad ways. And then the last thing is that power can be extraordinary or ordinary, a normal part of our lives, or it can be an abnormal part of our lives. And the examples here are, so parents are kind of an everyday influence on children's lives. They see their kids all the time, but visiting grandparents and aunts and uncles, they have power, and sometimes just unintentional influence, or they have intentional influence on the lives of their grandkids or their nieces and nephews and so on. And then you may be aware, this is especially the case in supermarkets, that there's something called product placement. So when you enter a supermarket, things are strategically placed to influence your purchasing decisions, right? And so that is a form of everyday power. You might say every time, and it's the same thing with if you don't have supermarkets, but you have like street vendors who are selling you things. They're trying to exert influence and power in certain ways in your purchasing decisions. And then lastly, of course, is the police. They're on the streets most of the time, but then at extraordinary moments, there may be military intervention, right? And so those are kind of ordinary versus extraordinary exercise of power. Okay, this slide is important because it's giving you a sense of 4 different types of power. And we're going to come back to this in a moment, but I want to kind of give you some definitions. So force is the most obvious form of power that everybody knows. And that is when A tries to affect B by physical or psychic means: verbal attack, beating, torture, imprisonment. Manipulation is a second type of power. And that is when you try to influence somebody else, but your intentions are not known, that you're trying to influence other people. Some people might know that the tobacco, just to give you an example, the tobacco industry purposefully manipulates the content of nicotine in cigarettes in order to make people more or less addicted to their product. The same thing with food companies, which increase or decrease the amount of salt, fat, and sugar in their foods in order to get people to get hooked and to really like their products, right? So that's manipulation. We're not necessarily aware of this, and the ways in which they're changing. And they change, by the way, it's not just sugar and salt and fat. Sometimes it's coloring, it's the marketing, et cetera, and so forth. It's the pricing. There are all kinds of things they do to try to, in some senses, either manipulate or persuade. Persuasion is a third type of, and the difference between manipulation and persuasion is that with manipulation, you're not aware that you're being influenced. With persuasion, you are aware that you're being influenced. And the influence, by the way, can be in all kinds of ways. It could be, we have a discussion and I'm trying to influence you through reason, through rational argument. But it can also be because I'm providing you evidence with data. So logic is or with data, or with the senses. I'm trying to persuade you by, let's say, a politician who grabs your shoulder or gives you a hug or gives you a kiss or something like that to try to influence you in certain ways. That's sensory, right? It's with the body. We're using ways to kind of persuade people. And then there's emotional persuasion, which is it's not the same thing as, keep in mind, verbal attack, right? It's where you're trying to influence people with emotion, but doing it in a direct way where people are aware of what you're doing. And lastly is authority. And here there's a command and obedience happening. Authority is about command and obedience. And the command is it can be based on a variety of things. Governments have authority in part because if you don't do as governments say, they can put you in prison or they can give you a fine. That's coercion. So it's authority based on coercion. So you obey because government has this kind of a power to back it if you don't obey. But then there are religious leaders who have authority because of their religious status. There are all kinds of norms and traditions and so on, or their skills. If you have a PhD, or if you have a lot of education or knowledge or expertise in a particular area, that gives you authority. Or if you have charisma, your ability to interact with other people and through your interactive ability to influence them, or your what I would call projective charisma, which is you just simply, when you speak, people listen. Those are different kinds of interactional or projective charisma are different kinds of influence. So these are examples of people who have authority: military officers, employers, tribal and religious leaders, professors, doctors, etc. Okay, let me get to, I think. There are also degrees of power. And here, I'm going to just quickly gloss over this. There's the extent of power. In other words, how much territory or how many people you affect with your power. There is the comprehensiveness of power, which is how much of a person's life or how much of various aspects of a territory that you have influence over. And then lastly, there's intensity, the degree or the strength of that power that you exert over individuals, groups, or territories. So here's a question for you guys. And I'm going to bring up the chat again. Because, and we got a lot of messages here, I want to ask you which forms of power you think are rising or declining in contemporary societies. And I'm going to go back to that slide with the 4 types of power, but this is the question, is which of these 4 forms of power are rising or declining in contemporary societies? And this has importance for us as citizen diplomats. Can everybody see this? I don't know if my chat, I think when I put the box here, everybody, it's actually not probably helping you to see. Does everybody see me moving the chat box like this?
We can see the screen.
You cannot see the screen?
We can see the types of power. It is visible.
Okay, it's all visible. Excellent. Okay, so my chat box is not affecting you. That's good. Okay, so here's my question for you. So which of these forms of power are declining and which are rising in our contemporary world? Leroy, who's joining us from Liberia and we haven't heard from yet.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here because I was on a very little problem, so I've resolved it. But firstly, I would like to say this before giving my view on the two things. Persuasive can be used, especially in my setting in Liberia, in Africa here. People can persuade people to manipulate them. And I think here the application of the two powers are interconnected in our place. So based on that, I would say persuasion and manipulation are on the increase, while authority is on a decrease because people are afraid to command and people are not willing to, they are not brave enough to tell people, oh, I want you to do this, because they feel that person might likely go against them either politically or one way or the other in any form in the society. So I think it's on a decrease now.
Really interesting. Leroy is suggesting that so as he indicated, persuasion manipulation might be on the increase and authority declining, in part because people are just afraid to exert authority. The legitimacy of authority is more questioned nowadays, but persuasion manipulation, and keep in mind those are two different things, right? Persuasion and manipulation are two different things. One is deliberate and conscious, and people are aware of what's happening. That's persuasion. Manipulation is when you're not aware of what's the ways in which you're being influenced, right? So I think Fatima had wanted to speak, but Fatima, or is it Farzana? Farzana, go ahead.
Yes. I raised a hand for the asking a question because I want to try to understand the manipulation of the power. This is the second type of the power, and we feel that I just want to understand this point. And with the example, I am asking from you that in the context of the Pakistan, I am asking that the sometime the people using their power for the exploitation of the rights of the someone, because in social context I am asking these questions. And like the way with the example of that, the for getting of the job, people are trying to get the by using of their power, they trying to manipulate the second one person and want to get the some bribe or the some money or the some other like the favor of the sexual types of the favor. So is it come under the power manipulation type, the second type of the power manipulation or not? I want to understand that this one, firstly, this one thing.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you're asking is when somebody tries to, so for instance, an employer says, hey, if you want a job with me, you're going to have to pay me, or you're going to, in some way, is that right? And you're asking of that example.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this I am asking.
Right. So clearly that's a form of corruption. It's not, well, it's an exercise of power, but it's a corrupt form of power. Go ahead. Oh, Farzana, you may want to turn
under the second type of the power or not.
Right. So I let me throw this at you guys. Farzana, you may want to turn off your video while you're speaking, just so that we can hear you, because I think there's a weakness in your connection. But is there anybody who can answer her question? What do you think is the power that's being exercised here? What type of power is being exercised among these four? If somebody, it's an employer who's saying, hey, in order to get this job, you've got to do something for me. You've got to pay me or do some sort of sexual favor or whatever. What is that? What kind of power is that?
Force or
So
coercion?
political first type of power, force.
You think it's coercion, Umar?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
sir. I think it's Trojan because he's forcing her to pay her back in physically, or we can say.
Yep. Yeah, I guess it depends, right? It depends on what they're asking for to some extent. Begum, you were going to say?
I agree with Omar. It seems more like a coercion, but also I want to make a brief. I want to give a brief answer to your question. Which types of power are increasing and decreasing? I think it's depends on the context. For example, in underdeveloped countries, in third world countries, in some poor countries, let's say, manipulation and coercion is increasing, I guess, because like verbal attacks, beating, torture, in third world countries we can see, or underdeveloped countries. But in the developed Western countries, in liberal democracies, persuasion is more powerful as a form of power. Also, authority plays a role as well. But in terms of the previous comment, it's a corrupt form of power, I think.
Yeah, and then you're both suggesting so you and Umar are both suggesting that it's coercive.
Yes.
So physical and or psychic means, yeah, you raise I think it was and I can't remember who was raising. I think it was Farzana that was raising this this example. And I guess it does depend, right? It is coercive to the extent that if an employer is saying, look, you need to provide some services in order to get this, it's not persuasion. That's essentially it is either coercion or some sort of authority or exercise of authority. The coercion would be clearer. It's a clearer case of coercion when it involves like a force being exerted essentially on a person. So sexual violence or sexual where there's a sexual bargain, where they're compelling somebody in that sense, that's more clearly coercion, right? So let's get at some of the messages here that many of you have been writing in the Zoom chat. And I want to ask actually, Dia, if you could read. Starting with, and I'm scrolling. I don't know if you can see this, but starting with Sammy, who says power is basically controlling everyone through economically and emotionally. Do you see that, Dia?
I'm looking for it right now.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
got a photo. Yeah, yep. Power is basically controlling. Go ahead.
Or wait.
Power, it's if you could scroll up.
Oh yes, yes.
Power is basically controlling. Sammy, no one.
Yeah. So Nomad said power is basically controlling everyone through economically and emotionally. And then
Juliana.
Juliana said, I would say that power can be seen when someone exercises dominion over another person or over something. Then Big Room said power is everywhere, not above or a higher authority. Power is knowledge. And she went on and said biopower is also important, and vaccination in the pandemic era is biopower. And then Itai said nothing is more dangerous than power in the hands of one who suffers from a sense of mental inferiority. The formula for oppression is power without mental soundness. And then Chia said powers start from a family to state and to international. Nayab said manipulation is the most effective type. Most of diplomats and officials use this. And Mohammed said, isn't persuasion a kind of positive manipulation? Fatima said most common too, and said, but it's very common in Pakistan. Applicants are asked for bribe, or sometimes applicants directly approach authorities and confirm their job. Itai says obviously is manipulation. And Juliana said these concepts are somehow a little connected. Leroy said here in my country, persuasion and manipulation and the orders of the day because of the fear of losing voters. My country is so political, and so most people do not use authoritative forms of power, and it's used on the decrease. Many people prefer to persuade their fellow citizens into things that they aren't aware of.
Okay. I want to get back to this question that Mohammed raised, which is whether or not, I can try to scroll back, let me see here, to Mohammed's question, which is, isn't persuasion a kind of positive manipulation? Not quite. So there's a really important difference, right, between manipulation and persuasion, because it's not that it's manipulation by definition means you're not aware that you're being manipulated. You're not aware that you're being influenced. In persuasion, you are aware of it, and that really, really matters. You're aware that, and somebody's actually, part of the virtue of persuasion, you might say, is that it's treating you in some sense as an equal, right? As somebody who has their own senses, who has their own reason, who can look at evidence, who has their own emotions, and you're engaging them in those different, whatever ways you choose to engage, through reason, through evidence, through the senses, or through emotions. You're trying to persuade them, to bring them to your side. So in democracies and in more, you might say, civil conversation between people who disagree with each other, persuasion is the way to go. It is for the most part, oftentimes, a good form of power, because the other person is aware of what you're doing. But it's true, I think, Mohammed, that sometimes influence and manipulation, persuasion and manipulation are intertwined. You can have both happening at the same time. So it's complicated. Okay, so I want to get into this about which forms of power are rising and declining in contemporary societies. So this is general, and I think Begum's point about the difference between richer. I think somebody has their. If you can make sure to mute yourself so that we don't hear you. If there's background noise, I'd much appreciate it. So. So coercion generally in the world is declining. That does not sound like it's true, right? There are some places where coercion is increasing, but you have to look, when you're thinking about the long-term trend over hundreds of years, hundreds and thousands of years in human history, coercion is in fact declining as a form of power. Why? In part because it's costly. It requires armies and police and prisons and spies and street cameras, et cetera, and so forth, if you want to have coercive power. Another reason is that people are getting more educated. With more education, people are harder to coerce. Why? Because they have more knowledge, they have more skills, and they have more of what's called, what political scientists call, self-efficacy. Self-efficacy means you feel like you've got power and you know how to exercise it. Okay, the more education you have, the more self-efficacy, knowledge, and skills you tend to have, and the less you're likely to be tolerant of abuses of power, okay, and coercive power. So education, right, and rising educational levels across the world are actually really good for trying to redistribute power in a more equitable direction. And then lastly, these beliefs, right, these rising beliefs in human rights, liberty, equality, and public welfare, to name a few, these concepts actually matter. They resonate with people. People want freedom. They want equality. They want human rights. They want to be treated properly. And it's related to education, right? These two things are intertwined. So coercion is declining. Authority is changing. Here, it's that we've moved from kings, queens, aristocrats, military, and religious leaders who are declining overall influence, again, over hundreds and thousands of years, not over the last couple of decades or over the last 2 or 3 years, but over time. Their power has declined. And the power of elected politicians, right? So not selected, but elected politicians, celebrities, They can be sports stars. They can be music stars. They can be artists of different kinds. So celebrities, actors, and experts. Be they, so scientists are a type of expert in some way, but scientists and experts, right? So what's declining is, as a basis for power, is birth. You know, I was born to a royal family and therefore you must obey me. Or status, I have a lot of money, or I have a lot of this or that, and therefore you must obey me. Those things, generally speaking, are declining as sources of influence. It's not to say that they're not still important. Where you were born, what family you were born into, and your status in terms of money, in terms of influence, in terms of position in particular organizations, that stuff still matters. It still matters a lot. But charisma and knowledge, and Begum was pointing this out when she mentioned this French philosopher Michel Foucault, are very important. They're growing in importance in the world, right? Charisma and knowledge are important. And so, by the way, this matters to us as citizen diplomats. So, as well, manipulation and persuasion are rising. And so there, Leroy is right. The above is especially true in business and media. Business and media are two kind of rising powers, you might say. And because people use media more and more and more, and because companies have transnational scope, their comprehensiveness, the number of people and countries that they affect is growing, especially if they're transnational big companies. So they use manipulation, oftentimes a combination of manipulation and persuasion to get people to buy stuff, to spend more, and or to work in different places, or work more, or work in different ways, and so on. So what power does everyone have, no matter how rich or poor? And here I'm going to just run into this because we're running out of time, and I want to give you guys some room to comment at the end. And so this is important, guys, because we are thinking about us as ordinary people. Some of you may think you don't have all that much power, but this is my answer to you as to what power you have and everybody has, or everybody can develop, no matter where you live in the world. And that is, one thing is what you do with your time. Everybody, no matter how rich or poor, no matter how powerful they are, have 24 hours in the day. What you do with your time is a source of your power. So the time that you have when you're awake is really important to your abilities to exercise power as a citizen diplomat. Two, and these are related things with regards to persuasion and authority, because a citizen diplomat should be exercising both persuasion and authority. And persuasion you can exercise through communication, your ability to write, your ability to speak, your ability to use photography, video, performance, visual art, etc., and so forth, to persuade other people. That's really important. Your communication skills are your persuasion power. Knowledge is also a form of persuasion power. It also can be a form of authority as well. But your knowledge is your expertise. One of the things that we're thinking about, and so I've talked with Mohammed about this, Mohammed from Afghanistan, and I've talked with Fatima from Pakistan about this privately. Is that, and actually Nusra, I think we've talked about this as well, is that I'm very interested in developing your knowledge. Mohammed, in your case, it's your knowledge of being a refugee, right, from Afghanistan, and the ways in which that can be a form of power. Knowing and being connected to other refugees is a form of power. It's a knowledge in terms of your expertise of your own personal experience of being a refugee is a potential form of power. You have knowledge that other people who are not refugees do not have, right? Fatima, you're in Pakistan, and what we've talked about is the influence that you're having, a form of power that you're exercising. You as I remember, I think, is Fatima still with us? I'm not sure if she's still with us, But
Yeah, I'm here.
you are here. Okay, good. So Fatima has a legal degree, but decided to go into essentially social work, working with women, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but essentially working with women in rural areas to try to give them voice and power, right? Your knowledge, your ability to speak to the lives of these women and girls that don't have that much power, but would like to have more power and voice. That is a form of knowledge. You have knowledge that is local, that you can share with the wider world, and that a lot of other people care about because it deals with girls and women's empowerment, right? And we want to develop that knowledge of yours and your ability to communicate, right? So those are two forms of persuasive power that we want to be able to develop. And by the way, part 2 of the training is all devoted to your communication skills, and particularly your ability to storytell on some sort of family issue that matters to you. And then lastly here is numbers. And this again gets to ultimately, when we're developing family diplomacy, we want you to be nested in a network of people who care about the same issues you do. So to give another example, Nusrat, who's joining us from Bangladesh, she cares a lot about the environment, and her family has been affected by monsoon rains, torrential rains in her country. The same thing with Sami, by the way, in Pakistan. They've been affected by flooding. In fact, I don't know how many of you, the number of you are joining us from Pakistan and may have been affected by the floods there that happened. And so your influence depends in part on your ability to be connected with all these other people who are affected by the same problems, and your ability as a citizen diplomat, right, as a family diplomat, to talk about their lives and the ways their lives have been affected by the issues you care about, whether it's girls and women's empowerment, whether it's environmental destruction, whether it's political corruption. Leroy, and I think Chia in both your cases, and I actually in Chirunim as well, in all your cases, in some sense, you guys are concerned about political corruption. These are all issues that are affecting you, they're affecting people you know, and they're affecting families. And the extent to which you can use your persuasive powers, right? Your ability to communicate, your knowledge, and your authority that is based on the number of people that you know that are affected by this issue is a source. These are sources of your power. Okay. So I'm gonna just quickly gloss over this because I want to leave some time for discussion, a little bit of discussion. So there are different sectors of society. There's business, government, and civil society. And the basic point is that civil society is something you should be aware of. It is the area where citizen diplomats operate, and that is think of churches, nonprofit schools, charities, sports clubs, professional associations, families. They are voluntary associations. People come together voluntarily. And they try to pursue certain interests, whether it be sports or religion or politics, right? So that's the area of civil society, and that's the area that we are operating in as citizen diplomats. And these are the kind of forms of power that different sectors of society have. Governments tend to exercise coercive and authoritative forms of power. Business tend to exercise manipulation and persuasion. Civil society, including citizen diplomats, what we exercise is persuasion and authority. Citizen diplomacy can and does happen via business and government, but we're generally part of civil society. Okay. So I'm going to stop it there and leave it with these questions, and I'm going to open it up for comments. I know that was a lot to cover, but I hope this was interesting, and I hope you learned a fair amount. And I want to leave some time for comments. Let's have Summer, if you don't mind. If you could, I think Summer's with us. I can't. Oh yeah, there you are. If you could just read the most recent comments that have not been read yet. I think there are just a couple.
Sure. What was the last comment read?
It's a good question. Leroy's, which is a big paragraph. He says, here in my country, persuasive and manipulation. That was the last comment.
Okay, so then Farzana said, manipulation is so common in my country. And then Muhammad said, thanks, sir. Bilal said, maybe persuasion is most important of all. Importance of education is key. Then Juliana said, education and knowledge are a real power. Leroy said, that's just a bit of what's happening in my country at the moment. Bilal said, yes, sir, I agree. Media manipulating our minds, what's happening. Actual media, not shows, but media shows what can give benefits to them only. Then Leroy said, today's meeting is one of the best. Mohammed said, yes, that's true. Bilal said, yes, sir, climate change is becoming a serious issue in Pakistan. Because of this issue, Pakistan has faced billions of dollars of loss last year. And he then said, last year's flood is an example of this issue. I worked as a flood relief volunteer with Al Khidmat Foundation, which is a nonprofit NGO last year. Fatima said, yes, Bilal, people are not even aware of this serious issue. We need to educate people and divert their attention towards this topic. And Nusrat said, I believe climate change is the biggest issue across the world. Farzana then said, yes, climate change is a big challenge in Pakistan. People are affected badly by this change. In the example is 2022 and to some extent the flood of 2023. And that's it.
Great. Thanks, Summer. Gets back to, these points you guys are making about the environment, right? Gets back to this intertwined yet disconnected. There are a lot of Americans have no idea that a flood happened in Pakistan. And yet we, as Americans, were actually partly responsible for the flooding that happened in Pakistan. It's complicated, right? But we are, as the biggest carbon emitters in the world, having impacts all over the world. There are countries, little islands, that are facing extinction because of the threat of climate change and rising waters, right? And so Americans, among others, and this is part of why we do what we do, is we need to wake up to the impact that we're having on the world in ways that we're not even aware of. Fatima, I want to just give you guys a couple of minutes for anybody for the last couple. We'll take 2 comments and then we'll have to stop and we'll continue next week. Fatima.
Actually, I have raised hand for the previous discussion. Can I ask the question or should I email you for that?
You can ask your question.
Okay. Like, as you know that I work for women. Here, women, like everyone was saying, education is a power. So my question is that here people are not aware, women are not aware of their powers. And for shelter, they live with the husband who beat them day and night and who cannot provide them a good life. Even then they live there. But when they are educated and they know about their rights and they want to come back because we live in a joint family system. Here, a girl cannot live usually alone. So we come back to our parents. So our parents also, don't support us. Like this, they manipulate or they emotionally blackmail us in the name of honor that for our respect, you have to live in that life. So which kind of power is this? Is it manipulation? Because the parents and the husband and everyone does this intentionally. So is it manipulation? This was my question. Thank you.
It's not manipulation because manipulation means you're not aware of it and you are clearly aware of it, right? It is either coercion or a form of authority. And you might argue, some of these are debatable, right? Or it may be in some cases a form of persuasion. In some cases, they're intertwined, right? So authority and coercion are oftentimes intertwined, but it depends what the basis of authority is, right? It can be charisma, as you might remember. It can be tradition, like you're a religious figure and people traditionally respect you for that. It can be based on your physical ability to coerce somebody, like unfortunately husbands who can beat their wives if the wives. So it's a kind of authority, Yeah, so it really varies depending on the kind of the basis of the what's being exercised. So I would
So
say,
this
yeah.
kind of power is very common in our country, like authority and coercion is so common because like when I see women, even if the urban and rural area, both women are not happy and they live because their parents don't allow them. So it's very common. Thank you for correction.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else? Okay, we are at, I want to respect your time, and we are at time. We're a little past time. So Bilal, if you can share your comment in the Facebook chat, on Facebook, not in the Zoom chat. Would love for you guys to continue the conversation. By the way, the Facebook group that we have is a place where you guys can exchange ideas, share your experiences, follow up on the discussion. You guys are all connected to each other. Hopefully, I think you're all on the Facebook group. If you're not in the Facebook group, you should let me know. But it's called the 2023 FD trainees, I think it is. And it's a great place for you guys to continue conversation and ask questions and so on. And I will answer, and some of our interns will answer if need be. So thank you all for your participation. It's been, I'm really glad that you've been participating. Next week, just so that you know, it's actually a friend of mine is going to be presenting. His name is David Meskill. So it's actually a change in the professor. And I'll tell you more about David, but a very nice guy who's going to be talking to us about globalization, about markets, about what was it? About markets and about what's called state capture. And governments. And so that's will be particularly relevant to those of you who are concerned about political corruption. So yeah, but it affects everybody, and in even issues like climate change. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for your time. See you next Sunday. Bye, everybody.